Barney Barnato didn't just fall off a ship. He fell out of history, straight into mystery. In 1897, Barney Barnato, the man who controlled South Africa's diamond mines, valued at millions even then, allegedly threw himself off a ship bound for London. At just 46 years old, and at the height of his career, he reportedly jumped into the Atlantic Ocean. But this version of events doesn't quite add up. What often goes unmentioned is that Barnato had just made a bold business move that threatened some of the most powerful figures in the British Empire. He left no suicide note, showed no signs of mental distress, and the only witnesses to his supposed jump were individuals of questionable credibility, people who may have had something to gain from his death. This wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a financial earthquake, and someone may have wanted it buried. So, was Barney Barnato's death the result of mental illness? Or was he pushed, perhaps in more ways than one? Stay tuned, because what comes next could change everything. Who was Barney Barnato? Before the diamonds, the wealth, and the eventual fall? Barney was just Barnett Isaacs, born in London's East End. He began his journey selling cigars and performing street tricks, but his story took a dramatic turn when he ventured to Kimberley, South Africa, during the diamond rush of the 1870s. Armed with charm, sharp street smarts, and an audacious spirit, he managed to outmaneuver ruthless tycoons, including his most formidable rival, Cecil Rhodes. Though their rivalry was intense, it eventually led to a forced merger that made both men staggeringly rich, and their relationship dangerously volatile. At the height of his success, Barney's fortune was so vast that he could have bought Buckingham Palace and still had enough left for a yacht and a scandal. Let's rewind the clock to the weeks leading up to Barney Barnato's oh-so-convenient death. On the surface, everything seemed fine. He was unimaginably wealthy, owned vast portions of South Africa, and wielded enough influence to make politicians uneasy. But behind the scenes, pressure was mounting. Barney wasn't happy with the way his empire was evolving. After amassing a massive fortune by co-founding the Kimberley Central Diamond Mining Company and later merging it into De Beers, he found himself increasingly surrounded by people vying for control, particularly British financiers who valued profit over loyalty. In response, he began planning a complex financial restructuring, a strategy to buy back shares, reshuffle control, and consolidate power entirely on his own terms. It was a bold move, and if successful, it would grant Barney more control than ever before, at the expense of certain powerful gentlemen who were not thrilled about losing influence. The plan was so disruptive, it threatened to shift financial balances not only in South Africa, but even within London's stock exchange. His adversaries weren't merely rival businessmen, they were institutions. The stakes were high. One wrong move, and it wasn't just money on the line. It was war with people who never lose. Was starting to circle around this time, rumors began to circulate that Barney was mentally unwell. Some newspapers described his behavior as erratic, while others claimed he was exhausted, paranoid, even delusional. Convenient, right? What's strange is that these claims emerged shortly after he announced his plans to disrupt the diamond industry. Coincidence? Or a calculated smear campaign to discredit him in case things went sideways? After all, if someone labeled unstable were to meet a tragic end, the public likely wouldn't ask too many questions. It would simply fit the narrative. The whole "he was mad" storyline started to feel a little too neatly scripted. In June 1897, Barney boards the SS Scott, allegedly bound for England for health reasons. But here's where things start to feel off. This man, said to be suffering from hallucinations, depression, and mental exhaustion, sets off on a long sea voyage completely alone. No nurse, no doctor, not even a therapist with a clipboard in sight. Even his nephew, who accompanied him, gave vague responses when questioned about Barney's mental condition. Then things take a turn straight out of a detective film. Only 2 people claimed to have seen Barney jump, and both had connections to individuals who stood to gain from his disappearance. One of these so-called witnesses even contradicted themselves in their account. Strangely, the ship's log hardly mentions the incident, offering only a brief, dismissive note, as if someone wanted to brush it under the rug. You'd expect the mysterious death of a millionaire aboard an ocean liner to generate a bit more paperwork. And to top it all off, Barney's body was never conclusively recovered. A burial at sea was supposedly carried out, but there's no physical evidence, no photographs, no coffin, just stories. Just days before the voyage, Barney updated his insurance policies, ensuring a massive payout would go to his family and business partners in the event of his death. Now, I'm not saying people definitely get suspicious when wealthy men suddenly die right after insuring themselves for millions, but I'm definitely saying they should. In short, Barney was either trying to shield his family from a financial storm he saw brewing, or someone else knew they were about to cash in, big time. A wealthy diamond magnate jumps off a ship, no note, no body, and witnesses with questionable motives. That alone screams that something's off. And trust me, people have been trying to make sense of this for over a century. Historians, conspiracy theorists, journalists, even amateur detectives on Reddit have all asked the same question. Did Barney Barnato really take his own life? Here's a breakdown of the 3 most widely debated theories. Let's start with the version they wanted everyone to believe. According to the official record, Barney was mentally unstable. He was said to be hearing voices, acting erratically, and ultimately overwhelmed by the pressures of his business empire. In a supposed moment of madness, he leapt from the deck of the SS Scott and drowned in the cold Atlantic. It's a dramatic story, but it's riddled with holes. For one, no medical report ever diagnosed him with a mental illness, and there was no history of psychiatric issues. In fact, he had been actively involved in major financial decisions right before the trip. There was no suicide note, no final words, nothing. And here's a plot twist. The narrative of his insanity only gained traction after his death. Funny how that works, isn't it? It's also worth noting who benefits from a convenient suicide story. The very people who wouldn't want anyone asking further questions. So while this version may be the most official, it also reeks of being neatly packaged for public consumption. This one definitely raises eyebrows. Think about it. Barney was a serious threat. He had built his empire from scratch and wasn't afraid to take bold steps, like challenging the British elite to regain control. That's how you make powerful enemies. He was going up against the likes of Cecil Rhodes and influential London financiers, the 1% of the 1%. These weren't the kind of people who settled disputes in court. They had the power to make problems vanish. Barney was on the verge of making major changes to how his business empire operated. He was threatening old money and disrupting a system that functioned like a rigged casino. Some theorists believe he didn't jump. He was pushed, maybe literally, or maybe through a carefully orchestrated setup that made his death look like a suicide. And let's be honest, if someone wanted to paint a picture of a man cracking under pressure, the "he was mad" narrative would be the perfect cover. Oh, and the witnesses who confirmed the suicide? Both had ties to the financial circles that stood to gain from Barney's sudden departure. Murder or not, it was certainly convenient. This one's for those who enjoy a good what if. What if Barney never died at all? It may sound crazy, but let's consider the suspicious details. First, his body was never conclusively recovered. His burial at sea? There are no photographs or documentation, only claims. He was also reportedly acting strange before the trip, but in a secretive way, not suicidal, and given his intelligence and wealth, he could have easily pulled off a disappearing act. The theory goes like this. Barney faked his death to escape the overwhelming pressures of business warfare, public scrutiny, and possibly even threats to his life. He staged a suicide during a solo voyage on a ship with minimal oversight, then slipped away under the radar. Perhaps he bribed crew members, had help, or spent the rest of his life sipping brandy on an obscure island under a different name. While this theory may sound far-fetched, it's just as strange as the idea of a billionaire throwing himself off a ship without warning, especially at the peak of his career. Both scenarios are odd, and the fact that no definitive proof of his death has ever surfaced only adds to the mystery. So, what's the truth? That's the big question. No one knows. Even after 125+ years, Barney Barnato's death remains one of the most baffling and suspicious events in financial history. Whether it was suicide, sabotage, or a staged vanishing, one thing is certain. Someone benefited from his disappearance. And it wasn't Barney. Theories will continue to swirl, but the silence that followed his death? That's the loudest part of all. Barney Barnato disappeared in June 1897. Whether he fell, jumped, or was pushed, the result was the same. He was gone. But what happened after the man behind the diamonds vanished? This is where things get really interesting. When a powerful man dies mysteriously, the chaos that follows often reveals more than the event itself. And in this case, the aftermath was just as suspicious as the death. 1. A fortune frozen. Then divided Barney's estate was valued at over £5 million at the time, which would be more than £600 million today when adjusted for inflation. That's no small sum, and such wealth doesn't change hands quietly. When news of Barney's death broke, his rivals wasted no time. Legal battles, backdoor deals, and share transfers flew through London like confetti. His once unyielding control over mining assets quickly began slipping into the hands of, unsurprisingly, the very institutions he had spent years fighting against. It was as though vultures were circling before his body was even cold. Financial publications at the time even reported unusual trading activity following his death, with certain investors seemingly knowing what was coming before it happened. Was it a coincidence, or did they have insider knowledge? 2. Cecil Rhodes, the real winner. Cecil Rhodes emerged as the biggest beneficiary of Barney Barnato's sudden exit. Once Barnato's fiercest rival and later a business partner in De Beers, Rhodes now faced no opposition. With Barnato out of the picture, Rhodes no longer had to contend with power struggles, pushback, or the fiery unpredictability of a man who had constantly threatened to disrupt the system. This allowed Rhodes to solidify his empire, with De Beers gaining further dominance and British financiers reaping the rewards. In a calculated move, Rhodes issued a dignified public statement about Barnato's tragic death, presenting it as if they had lost a cherished friend rather than a longtime adversary. It was a polished, PR-driven response, yet when examined closely, it was strikingly cold-blooded. 3. The public bought the story, or were told to. The official narrative, that Barney went mad and jumped, was widely printed in newspapers around the world, with the press largely accepting it without question. Why? Because it was convenient, coming from trusted sources, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was easier to believe he lost his mind than to confront something darker at play. However, not everyone accepted this version. Letters to editors, whispers in business circles, and private conversations among shareholders often suggested a different story. The public wasn't naive. They simply didn't have Twitter to spread suspicions in real time. Despite this, the story was considered settled, and history books closed the chapter, presenting it as a tragic tale of mental health, rather than a high-stakes chess move. The family, left with silence and shadows. Barney left behind a wife and 2 children, while his nephew Joel inherited much of the business interest and would later become a powerful figure in his own right. Yet despite this, No one within the family pushed to reopen the case. Perhaps they were paid to stay quiet. Maybe they feared stirring things up, or it's possible they knew the truth and decided some things were better left buried. One thing is certain, no one ever fought to challenge the official version, and that silence, it might be the loudest clue of all. Over time, Barney Barnato became little more than a footnote in the history of the diamond industry, a colorful character with a rags-to-riches tale and an unfortunate end. Yet his impact was rarely acknowledged, and the circumstances of his death? Most people have forgotten them. It's as if someone edited his story for mass consumption, cutting out the uncomfortable parts and leaving behind a polished version. But here's the thing, legends don't disappear. They get whispered about, questioned, and dug up again. That's why, over 125 years later, we're still talking about Barney Barnato. His story never truly ended. It just went quiet. The truth is, his story wasn't just about diamonds. It was about power and what happens when someone dares to challenge it. If a man with money, influence, and global reach can vanish without a ripple, what else have we been told to simply accept? If this made you question things, stick around. There's more where that came from. In the next video, we'll unveil another bizarre accidental death from history's archives, and trust me, it's got fingerprints all over it. Hit that button and show the algorithm that you're not here for the easy answers. You're here to challenge what they've told you was fact. Because in a world full of official versions, curiosity is the greatest rebellion.